For our first instructional video on how to use the Anthologion, we're going to just focus on the simple variables, the simple service. All of the detailed guides can be found in the detailed guides section in the front of the book, and we're going to go through just the simple weekdays to start. For a simple weekday use of the Anthologion, we only need to mark two sections of the book. The first is the Octoikos, and that is the 8-week perpetual cycle of liturgical prayers and hymns that are used throughout the year. And in my case, right now, it is a Monday of tone 3. So I'm going to mark the marker at Monday of tone 3. And the more information about how to determine what tone you're in can also be found in the front of the book. So it's important to note that in the Orthodox Church, the new liturgical day begins at sunset with Vespers. So while it's a Monday of tone 3, we would actually start with Sunday evening at Vespers for the start of Monday. So we're going to put a mark there. And then we also need to mark the common hymns for weekdays for just a simple commemoration. And it's a Monday, so we'll mark the common hymns for Monday. So that's all we need to do. This method will not pay any attention to feast days or saints' days or anything, but this is a good, very simple way to get started. And this is a valid way to do the services, even though it does disregard the festal cycle. But the Octoikos and the daily hymns are the kind of the bedrock and the simplest way to do this. So if you're just getting started and aren't sure about inserting lots of different variables and all the different complications of the calendar, just start with the tone and the day of the week and the daily hymns. So the new day begins with Vespers. So if we were doing Vespers for a Sunday evening of tone 3, we would just begin as normal. And we would come to the Psalter reading. The Psalter reading can be found in this section, reading the Psalter. So if it is a Sunday evening, there actually is no assigned Psalter reading. That's kind of a concession that the church gives us for the labor of the long weekend Sunday services. So on Sunday evening, there outside of Lent, there is no Psalter reading. But if there were one, if it was a different day, we would read the proper Psalter reading here. Then we come to Lord, I Have Cried, where we begin inserting variables. So this is, if you're not comfortable with chanting or you're not knowledgeable enough with chanting, this can be simply read, but properly this would be chanted. And it says in the tone of the Stichira. So the Stichira are the hymns that are inserted between verses at Lord, I Have Cried and in other places. So these are called Stichira. And it's a Monday of tone 3, so we would chant this in tone 3. So we would chant, usually how this is done is the first two, Lord, I Have Cried and Let My Prayer, these are chanted more elaborately, and then the rest are chanted quickly. But there are different traditions with this, and you can just go with your local tradition and how you know how to do it from your own church. So when we come to the numbered verses, this is where we begin inserting the verses, or the Stichira between verses. So it's the most we would have is 10, but on a ordinary weekday there are 6. So we would continue reading or quickly chanting the verses up to number 6. At this point we would begin inserting, so we would read verse 6, and then we would insert the first of the 6 hymns. And then we would do verse number 5, and then the next Stichira, number 4, the next Stichira, and then this as down the line up to here. So at a simple service, or it says in Vespers, after glory to the Father, insert the appointed doxasticon if there is one. At a simple service, there is not one. We only have a Theotokion, which is a hymn to the Theotokos, or the Mother of God. So there is not a doxasticon. This would be used on a feast day, but there isn't one here. So we would do glory, and then immediately, both now and forever, and then insert the appointed dogmaticon, Theotokion, or other doxasticon. So then we would do this. So when we come to the end, it would be glory to the Father, both now and ever, and then the Theotokion. If you can master this pattern of inserting hymns and verses, that is the bulk of how it's done at Vespers and Matins. So once you understand the concept of finding the hymn and inserting it after the correct verse, you're pretty much all set. So just work on practicing that and knowing where you're going. It's always good to look up what the hymns are and then kind of get a feel for, okay, these are the 6 and the Theotokion, so you know where everything is, and then everything will go smoothly, and just with a little bit of practice, it'll become second nature very quickly. So after the Lord I Have Cried sequence, we come to the Hymn of Thanksgiving, which is also known as O Joyful Light. So this is properly, it would be read at a simple Vespers service, but in some traditions it's always sung. So you can do what your local tradition is. The next variable part is the evening prokimenon. And aside from some very special cases on feasts, it will always be one of the ones listed here, just for the day of the week. So it's a Sunday evening in my case. So it would be in tone 8, Come bless the Lord, all you servants of the Lord. That would be sung. This can obviously all be read if you're not comfortable with singing, but it would properly be sung, and then the verse would be read, and then the refrain would be sung once again. The next variable is readings, which at a simple Vespers we will not have readings. So now there's a couple parts where what's called Great Vespers and Daily Vespers diverge. It's not, the two forms are not different enough that we made 2 separate forms in this book, like we did with Matins. So for this, there's just, on a festal day, there's a litany here, which is replaced by Lord Have Mercy, as with all the litanies, because readers are not able to do the litanies. That's proper to the deacon and the priest. So if you're just a layman and you're reading this at home, you would replace the litanies with Lord Have Mercy. And that's true throughout the book. We do have a section with the text of the litanies if you do have clergy or if you yourself are clergy. But lay people would just say, Lord have mercy, the prescribed number of times. So this litany is only done at Great Vespers. So on an ordinary weekday, this would be skipped. And actually this litany does come in a different spot. So after the prokimenon, we would come immediately to the evening prayer. Just this is read. And then the litany of supplication, we say, Lord have mercy 12 times. And then we come to the apostica, which is, again, it's inserting stichira between psalm verses. The only difference is, if you know Greek, from the name apostica, the A means without. So this just means that there is not a verse before the first hymn. So it is a Sunday through Thursday evening. So these are the verses that we would use. And then again, just like before, we would find the apostica. So, and with the apostica, because the psalm verses are, you don't have the shifting number of stichira, which can happen with feast days. We have the start of the verse actually right here, so you know exactly which verse to say. So we would start immediately after this. We offer you an evening hymn. And then the first verse, I have lifted my eyes, which the full text is here. Flip back to the second stichos. Save me, O Lord my God. And then have mercy on us is this next verse, and that's here. And then glory in both now and the Theotokion right here, and this is the full text of the Theotokion. So again, that's once you master inserting the verses and the hymns together, you'll be golden. After the Apostica, we continue with the Song of Simeon the God Receiver, which, like O Joyful Light, in some traditions it's sung and sometimes it's read, depending on the rank of the feast or also just all the time. And then we say the Trisagion prayers, which are common to all the services, and ideally that would be memorized. And then finally at the end we have the Apolatikia, which for a simple service we use the Apolatikion of the day, which in this case for Monday is the Apolatikion of the Angels. Again, it's a Sunday night, but because this is the beginning of Monday, we use the hymn for Mondays. So we would have the Apolatikion of the Angels, and then Glory to the Father, and both now and ever, and then the Monday Theotokion in the same tone, raised in the temple. And then, as this is a simple service, we have the 40 Lord have mercies here, and then the dismissal, which is the same at all services. Here there's a few festal great prochimena that are used on special occasions, but for a simple service these can be ignored. So that's the structure of Vespers for a simple commemoration. Then next is Little Compline, which is simple. There are no stichira at Little Compline. On certain occasions, on certain feasts, festal hymns can be inserted, but generally this does not have to be done. So this can be just read straight through. And then there are the prayers before sleep. Then the next morning we will go back to the prayers at waking and the midnight office. The weekday midnight office doesn't have any variables. So then we will come to Matins. Matins is the longest and most complex service of the daily office, and there are several different forms of Matins that are different enough that we do. Well, the beginning is the same, is always the same, and then after the section called the 6 Psalms is when the different forms diverge. So there's this table here that tells us which section to go to depending on the day of the week. So for just an ordinary weekday, we would continue with the Lord is God on page 62. So we will turn to page 62. And then this is the continuation of just ordinary weekday matins. So the first thing is the Lord is God, which is sung at the beginning of matins. And there is unfortunately an error in this book. It says it in the tone of the week. That would be true in certain cases, but for an ordinary weekday, it would indeed be in the tone of the Apolatikion, which on a Monday morning, the Apolatikion of the Angels is in tone 4. So this is actually incorrect, and it is correct in the tables. So just make sure you cross-check that. And a lot of this will become intuitive as you use it. If there's a common section of psalm verses that precedes a hymn, usually it will be chanted in the same tone as the hymn itself. So in this case, on a Monday morning, it would be chanted in tone 4. So we would chant this with the verses, with the refrains. These verses in brackets, in some traditions, these are omitted, and in other traditions, they're sung. So that's just a matter of preference and knowing what your local tradition is. So after the Lord is God, then we would chant the Apolatikion of the day. And this is always sung to 3. So we would sing "The Lord is God" for the final time, and then the Apologetican of the Angels, then "Glory to the Father," and then then the Apologetican of the Angels again, and then "Both Now and Ever," and then the Theotokion, "Raised in the Temple." And that is also laid out in the charts in the beginning. So refer to these for the full amount of detail. So after the Apologetia comes the Psalter readings and the poetic kathismata. So we would consult our Psalter chart, if I can find it back. So on a Monday morning, we would read the fourth and the fifth kathismas from the Psalter, and this chart tells us what psalms they are if we don't have a Orthodox Psalter with those divisions built in. So we'll read the first kathisma and then follow that by the first poetic kathisma, which is here, which is a series of hymns or troparia with psalm verses in between. So then we would return here, and then we would read the second kathisma from the Psalter, and then we would do the second poetic kathisma from the Octoikos for the tone of the week. And there are different traditions concerning the third poetic kathisma because there is no third Psalter reading. So this could be omitted except during Lent when there are three, or it could just be read immediately after the second. If it was the season after Pascha, we would insert "having seen the resurrection" during the 40 days of Pascha, but in our case that's not the case. So we would continue immediately with Psalm 50. After Psalm 50, we come to the section of Matins called the Canon. The Canon is a very complex set of liturgy. It's a very complex sequence. There are 9 odes, although the second ode is only used during Lent. So there are effectively 8 odes, and at 8 odes there are 14 troparia between verses, either refrains or psalm verses, depending on the tradition. For obvious reasons, this is very difficult, both to add to the book. It would more than double the size of the Octoikos. So we have omitted that because in most parishes, and even in monasteries, the full canon is not actually done. It's either abbreviated or it's in the Greek tradition. There are different hymns that are sung that are related to the canon, which we'll get to in the Sunday section. So for simplicity, we opted to do the biblical odes, and historically these are all of 14 verses, and the troparia of the canon were inserted between the verses of the biblical odes. But because of the great amount and complexity of the canons, we opted to just have the reader either read or chant the biblical ode verses themselves. These are beautiful, and they're often not done in parishes anymore, as the canons now are often chanted with refrains instead of the verses. So these are very worthwhile to read each day. So we've just kept the biblical odes, and even this by itself is a fairly long sequence of verses, especially for people with busy lives. So if you wish to abbreviate the canons further, it's possible to use this section here as a guide. But we come through the biblical odes, and then after the 6th ode, we insert the Kontakion of the day, which is here. Kontakion of the Angels, and that includes the Ekos at Matins. At other services, which we'll get to, the Ekos is not used, but for Matins it is. So we would read the Kontakion and the Ekos. And then we would continue with Odes 7 and 8. At Ode 9, we sing Greater in Honor Than the Cherubim as a refrain between the verses of the Magnificat. And then that's followed by the Canticle of Zacharias. And then we end the canon sequence with It Is Truly Right to Call You Blessed. And then the Lord Have Mercies in place of the little litany. After the canon sequence, we have the Ex Epistolaria, which is sometimes called the Hymns of Light, although that's properly more reserved for Lent. But these hymns come before the praises. So we have the Ex Epistolarian of the Angels and the Theotokian. In some traditions, I believe in the Slavic tradition, it's Glory and Both Now are read in between these. In the Byzantine tradition, that is not done, and that is the only case in which there would not be a Glory and Both Now in between a hymn and its Theotokian. So again, follow your local customs. Then for a simple day, we would read the Lauds hymns, which is Psalms 148, 149, and 150. And then this is followed by the Little Doxology, which is read. And then this Lord Have Mercy sequence in place of a litany. And then, as at Vespers, on a weekday, on a simple weekday, there is an Apostica at the end of Matins. So, again, we would turn to the Octoikos. And then here's the Apostica for Matins. And again, we insert the verses between the hymns, just as at Vespers. And then we have this short verse, the Trisagion prayers, and then the Apologetikion of the day, which again is that of the angels, and it's Theotokian. And then the dismissal. On Saturdays, this is the order for Matins, which we will skip over for now, but it's very similar. There are some additional elements for the departed, but in essence it's the same. Then finally we come to the lesser hours, 1st, 3rd, 6th, and 9th. These all have the same structure, so I'll just look at the first hour. So there are 3 psalms at the beginning. And then after the final psalm, there's glory, both now, alleluia, Lord have mercy, glory once again, and then it says the Apologetikion of the day, which once again is the Apologetikion of the angels. The Theotokion is not used at the hours, only the Apologetikion, only the principal Apologetikion of the day. And then both now, and then the hour has its own proper Apologetikion that's used every day, regardless of the Apologetikion. And then there are verses, the Trisagion hymn prayers, and then the Kontakion of the day, which again is found here, chief captains of God. And the Ekos, I said earlier, is only used at Matins. It's not used at any other service. So it's just the Kontakion is inserted here. Then Lord have mercy, the prayer of the hours, and then the proper prayer of the hour, and the dismissal. So all of the lesser hours have the same structure. And then we would continue through the day doing the same thing. Typica is usually only done in place of the Divine Liturgy, such as on a Sunday if you're not able to attend church, or on a feast day, but it can be read every day. There are different traditions as to where in the sequence it would be read, but generally it's reserved only for Lenten seasons. But just to show you the variables for here, if you're replacing the liturgy, the appointed epistle and gospel readings for the day from the lectionary can be inserted here, and the lectionary is found in the instructional material at the beginning. So it counts back from the weeks after Pascha and then the weeks after Pentecost. And more information about that can be found in the Epistle and Gospel books offered by St. Ignatius Orthodox Press, or from your jurisdictional authorities will usually publish the daily lectionary as well. And the only other variable at Typica is the Kontakion of the day, which again is found here. And then the 9th hour, and then we come back around again to Vespers. And at this point, we would be at the end of the day, and we would come to the next liturgical day, which would be Tuesday. And we would just continue Monday evening at Vespers. So it's a perpetual cycle. The next week we would come to the next tone, and we would cycle back around. And this cycle continues until Pascha, and Thomas Sunday would nominally be tone 1. So more information about finding the tone of the week and the date of Pascha and everything else is in the front. So this was an explanation of the simple commemoration on a weekday, and in future videos we will break out a simple Sunday and move on to festal commemorations.